It is a centuries-old tale that in a village near Basra, there lived 3 friends named Hamdan, Zayd, and Khalifa. The 3 of them were very close friends. Wherever they went together. Their friendship was well known throughout the village. Whenever one of them fell into trouble, all 3 would face it together. But time and circumstances are never the same. Sometimes, fate turns in such a way that it throws a person into situations they could never have imagined. This happened during a time when Basra was struck by famine. Food and water became scarce. The 3 friends were poor, and the growing poverty only added to their struggles. Once they used to roam Basra, carefree, but now, hardships had surrounded them, when hunger and poverty crossed all limits. The 3 sat under a large banyan tree, in despair. Finally, they decided that, just as they had always supported each other in tough times, they must do so again. They said, "We've faced poverty for many years. Now we must do something that will make us rich quickly." Staying in Basra meant being devoured by hunger. So, they gathered whatever little savings and belongings they had, and with a burning desire to change their fate, they set off toward an unknown destination. They had no idea how far or how long the journey would be, but they kept walking. After traveling for several hours, they reached a strange, unfamiliar village. The village lay hidden within an ancient forest. There was a deep silence all around. After journeying the entire day, they arrived just as night began to descend. The cool evening breeze only added to their exhaustion. Khalifa pulled a piece of cloth from his travel bag and made a temporary tent. The second friend, Hamdan, went off to gather firewood, while the third, Zayd, placed their belongings in the tent and started preparing to cook a meal. A short while later, Hamdan returned with bundles of wood. Zayd used the wood to light a fire and began to cook. Soon, the meal was ready, and the 3 friends sat down together and ate. After dinner, they lay down to rest for a while. One of them asked, "Did we make the right decision, leaving our village?" To this, the second friend replied, "When a traveler sets out to reach his destination, he doesn't count his steps. Nor does he stop due to the troubles that come his way. He keeps moving. The desire to reach the destination keeps him from getting distracted by hardships. And in the end, after enduring all his struggles, he reaches his goal." Hearing this, their resolve grew even stronger. They were lying down, exhausted, lost in their thoughts, when suddenly, they heard the sound of a hiss. All 3 friends were startled. Hamdan said, "That sound, it's dangerous." Just as Hamdan was speaking, suddenly they saw a large black cobra coiled near Khalifa's foot. The snake raised its hood and was about to strike when the other 2 friends quickly grabbed Khalifa and pulled him back. Khalifa narrowly escaped, being bitten. Since they had no weapons to kill the snake, they had no choice but to flee. They couldn't even retrieve their belongings. The deadly cobra was still inside the tent. They couldn't stay in the forest. And returning to the tent was out of the question. It was too dangerous to remain there. So, they left everything behind and started walking empty-handed through the dark forest. After walking for a while, they reached a quiet spot where they saw a small hut with a light glowing inside. At that late hour of the night, the light was a ray of hope for them. Exhausted, they approached the hut. One of them said, "Brothers, it's not right to enter the hut without permission. It goes against good manners." So instead of entering, the 3 friends sat outside and waited for the darkness to pass. After some time, signs of daylight began to appear. The darkness slowly faded, and birds began to chirp. The 3 friends lay quietly outside the hut. They had escaped the terror of the night, but the shadow of fear still lingered over them. Just then, an old man stepped out from the hut. His face was glowing with light, and he looked as though he had just finished his prayers. The old man looked at their condition with kindness and said, "My children, please come inside." He welcomed the 3 friends warmly. When he learned that they had come seeking work, he said, "My son, the shepherd who looks after my goats has gone missing somewhere in the forest. If you can find and bring back the goats, I will reward you handsomely. Khalifa replied, Baba Ji, don't worry. We'll find your goats and bring them back safely. After breakfast, the three friends set out into the forest in search of the goats. The jungle was filled with many kinds of dangerous animals, but the poor friends had no other choice at that point. They were ready to do anything for some money. They spent the whole day wandering through the forest looking for the goats, but found nothing. Exhausted and disheartened, they finally reached a large tree, and suddenly, joy lit up their faces, because right under that tree was the herd of goats. The herd was there. They immediately thanked Allah and quickly brought the goats back to the old man's hut. Seeing his goats, the old man said, You may spend the night here in peace. In the morning, take your reward and continue on your journey. All three friends agreed to stay the night in the kind elder's hut. At sunrise, they prepared to leave, but Hamdan had a question in his heart. He asked the old man, Baba Ji, don't you have any family? How do you live alone in such a dangerous forest? The old man replied, My son, I've been living in this forest for over 30 years. I've faced many dangers in my life. I've grown used to all of this. Then, the old man went inside his hut and returned with a small pouch. He handed it to Khalifa and said, My son, this pouch is more valuable than you can imagine. It contains 10 gold coins, ashrafis, for each goat. You feel like good, honest people to me, Khalifa asked in surprise. But Baba Ji, how can you give us such a treasure? The old man smiled and said, This is a reward for your honesty. If you weren't honest, you could have sold the goats at the market and kept the money. But you didn't. That shows your integrity. I have no use for this treasure at this stage of my life. Now it is yours. The friends, though hesitant at first, accepted the reward with gratitude, and so, their journey didn't lead them to a grand new land. Instead, it led them back home. But this time, they were not returning empty-handed. They carried with them the rewards of honesty, courage, and friendship. The home they had once left behind to fulfill a purpose. That purpose was now complete, because the treasure they now possessed was beyond anything they had imagined. With such a fortune in their hands, all signs of fatigue vanished from their faces. They kept walking for quite some time and eventually reached a strange village. After walking continuously for half a day, hunger overtook them. They stopped to rest under a tree. Khalifa took out a gold coin from the pouch and placed it in Hamdan's hand, saying, My friend Hamdan, please go into the village and bring us something to eat. Hamdan walked toward the village and soon reached a restaurant. He said to the owner, Give me the finest meal from your restaurant. Seeing Hamdan's poor condition, the owner scoffed and said, Hey brother, do you even have the money to afford such food, or are you just pretending to be rich? When Hamdan showed him the gold coin, the owner's eyes widened in shock. He immediately told his staff, Quick, bring the best food for this gentleman. Hamdan was extremely hungry, so he ate his meal right there and packed more for his friends. But then, a dark thought crept into his heart. He thought, what if I poison this food and become the sole owner of all the treasure? He was lost in this temptation when suddenly,
Hamdan suddenly remembered the past, those times when trouble would strike, and it was these two friends who always stood by him, shoulder to shoulder, never leaving his side. His heart was filled with deep remorse. Khalifa and Jad, sitting and waiting for the food, were also overcome by greed. They thought, what if we get rid of Hamdan and keep the treasure between just the two of us? We'd get a bigger share that way. But at that very moment, the call to prayer, Adhan, echoed through the air as soon as they heard it. Their hearts were filled with the fear of God. They were ashamed of their thoughts. They too recalled the past. That same Hamdan who had always stood with them through every hardship, who would go anywhere without fear, whenever they needed him, and today He had gone alone to bring them food, and what were they thinking about him? They, too, sacrificed their greed for the sake of friendship. Shortly afterward, Hamdan arrived with the food. The three of them looked at each other and smiled, but said nothing. Hamdan quietly placed the food in front of them and sat down. They had just started eating when suddenly 2 thieves showed up. These were the same thieves who had seen the precious gold coin in Hamdan's hand in the village, and had suspected he might be carrying even more treasure. They had been following him the entire time. They kept fighting, and finally, just like always, the 3 friends together defeated the thieves and drove them away. Then they quickly grabbed their treasure and left the place. As they were walking, talking among themselves, Hamdan suddenly said, "If I had poisoned the food, I wouldn't even have the treasure today, ... because those thieves would have easily looted me when I was alone." He thanked God, the one who had saved him from falling into greed. On the other hand, both Khalifa and Jad were thinking the same thing. If we had gotten rid of Hamdan, we could never have fought off those thieves alone. We would have lost the treasure for sure. They were deeply ashamed of their past, thoughts and endlessly grateful to God for saving them from being blinded by greed. So, with hearts full of gratitude, they continued their journey, and within a few days, they finally reached their village again. They arrived at the same old banyan tree where their story had begun. They sat under the same tree where they often used to sit. They placed the treasure pouch in the center. Khalifa said to Hamdan, "My friend, you divide this treasure." But Hamdan replied, "No, I have complete trust in you. Either you divide it, or, let Zayd do it." Zayd also insisted that someone else divide it, saying, "Even if I get a smaller share, it's fine, you divide it." Now, all 3 were on the right path. No one wanted more than the others. Then Khalifa said, "Just like Zayd always divided food equally among us, let him divide the treasure as well." They all agreed. Zayd divided the gold coins equally. Each took their share and set off for home. With this treasure, they not only improved their own lives but also helped the many poor people around them. The entire village, the village that had once been in despair, became prosperous, thanks to these 3 genuine yet wandering friends. So, the lesson we learn from this story is that there is great blessing in unity. When we work together, we not only improve our own lives, but also become a means to help others. When a person approaches others with sincerity and compassion, and makes cooperation his strength, he can face any adversity easily. But if greed takes root in a person's heart, the wealth it brings can blind him. Even a king can turn into a beggar if blinded by greed. Greed not only weakens a person's conscience, but also turns good fortune into bad luck. Because the one who cannot be patient with his share, the one who does not act justly, but instead tries to snatch the rights of others, eventually loses everything. Friends, this world is a place of trials. Here, every person faces both comfort and hardship at different times, but only those people succeed who adopt patience, gratitude, and good character as their way of life. We must always remember that the fire of greed never extinguish. It hollows a person from within and leads them to a terrible end. That's why we should make honesty, integrity, and patience a part of our lives, because these principles not only bring blessings into our own lives, but also make us a guiding light for others. I hope you enjoyed this inspiring story. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments, and let us know which part of the world you're listening from. Thank you.